Hey everyone, it's Guilherme, and in this video we are going to get started with Godot and Firebase. In this first video of our series, we are going to create a login and register system. We have it running right now, so you can click on register. I can give an username to my user. In this case, I'm going to call it Guilherme test. It has to be an email, and now I have to give it a password and click on register. Once that's done, I'm going to be registered into the system, and now I can log in. So Guilherme test and the password that I've chosen, and now I can click on login. Now once I've been authenticated, we can give access to our player to our game. To achieve this, we won't use any SDK as it's not provided by Google for us, so we have to use their REST API, and to communicate with it we are going to use Godot's HTTP request node. Now to continue in this tutorial, you should be familiar with Godot's UI components. If you're not, there are going to be some links in the description of the video that you can watch before coming to this video. And having a basic understanding of REST APIs helps, but if you're not familiar with them, I'm going to give you a basic explanation, but you should dig further if you want to dive deeper into this subject. You should also be familiar with JSON files. If you're not, again, there are going to be some links in the description that you can follow to learn about them before continuing in this video. Now, this is going to be a code along tutorial, so if you'd like to, you can head over to our repository and import the Firebase login project, the starting version, into Godot. Now, before continuing, I just want to apologize as my voice is probably a little bit different. I'm currently sick, so please bear with me. Now, let's get started by first going to the Firebase website. If you are here, I assume that you already know what Firebase is, but if you don't know what it is, you can think of it as a mobile and web platform provided to us by Google that gives us several services ranging from push notifications, NoSQL databases, to machine learning. In this project, we're going to focus on the authentication part, and to get started, we have to first create a project. For this, you are going to need a Google account. If you don't have one, please create one, and then you can go to Google and search for Firebase console. It should be the first link. Now, for some reason, Google decided to keep only this page in Portuguese, so we're going to click on Add Project, and sorry again for the Portuguese page. We're going to give it a name. I'm going to call my one test Godot project. You can uncheck the first checkbox if you want to, as we probably don't want to share anything with Google, and click on confirm that you accept the user terms, and click on continue. Once again, it's going to ask you if you want to share anything with Google. Just click on create project, and now you can click on continue. After doing so, you'll be taken to your project's dashboard, and now we have to turn on our authentication product. To do so, go to develop, click on authentication, and go to signing method. You can see that we have several signing methods that we can use with Firebase. For now, we are going to rely on the email and password one, which is the first one that you see here on this table. Click on this icon, and now we're going to enable. Now this method has been enabled and we can start using it with our Godot game. Finally, click on save, and this is pretty much all we have to do in this project as of now. Later, we're going to come back here to get our API key, but for now, let's go back to Godot. This project is composed by 3 scenes. The main one, which is going to allow us to select if you want to either register a new user or login, and the 2 others, which are the register page and also our login page. The first thing that we're going to do here is connect the signals from our register and login buttons to our main control node, and also the login. When we click on register, we want to go to our register scene, and when we click on login, we want to be taken to our login scene. If we play our game now, you can see that if we click on register, we're going to go to this screen, and if we click on login, we're going to be taken to the login screen. Now that that's in place, let's talk how we are going to approach this problem. Our main idea here is to have an autoloaded script, which we are going to call Firebase, and that script is going to handle the communication between us and our Firebase REST API. Now, I've been speaking about REST APIs, and to understand what it is, first you have to understand what an API is. An API is an application programming interface, and it's just a fancy name that tells us that we have a way to communicate between 2 programs. In this case, we're going to communicate between our game and the service provided to us by Google, which is the authentication part of the Firebase ecosystem. And the word REST that comes before the API is just for us to know which type of API this is. And being familiar with this type of API, you can already know what to expect and what type of conventions you're going to be using when communicating to the server. The main thing that we're going to do here is take the information that the user inputs, for instance, their login and password, and we're going to send it to the Google API, and we're going to ask, hey, is this user registered? And if it is the password correct? Google is going to take that information, run it through their system, and then they're going to come back to us with a response. Either the user is authenticated, or no, this user has not been registered yet, or this user has been registered but the password is not correct. Based on that, we can react and do something, either prompt the user to register or tell him that his password is incorrect and that he should try again. Hopefully this crash course on APIs gets you to speed. If not, again, there are going to be some links in the description of the video that you can follow to dive deeper into the subject. Now let's create our Firebase script by going to our resource folder and creating a new one. We're going to call this folder static. And inside of this folder, we're going to create a new script, which is going to be called Firebase. The template can be empty, and we can click on create. Now we're going to go to the project settings and auto-load this script by searching it. You can leave it with the default name of Firebase and click on add. Now let's open our Firebase script on our script editor. And as I said previously, this script is going to be responsible to communicating with Firebase. For instance, when we want to register a user, we're going to reach out to this script and say, hey, we want to register a user with this email and password. And this script is going to reach out to Firebase and send a request to it. And our script that made that request, for instance, our register script, is going to get a response. And based on that, we are going to tell our user that he has either registered correctly or that he should try again. To do so, we're going to need an API key. And this is the part that we're going to go back to the Firebase console to get this API key. We need this because Firebase needs to know that we are actually us and not some random people trying to create users inside of our Firebase project. So let's go back to our Firebase console. And right besides our project overview, we can click on this icon, project settings. And here we are going to find our web API key. We can double click and copy it. And by the way, you don't have to worry, I'm going to delete this project right after finishing this video. So I don't really care about showing this API key with you. Go back to Godot and paste our API key. Now keep in mind that you should not put this API key in any public repositories. If you do so, people will be able to, as I said before, make requests on behalf of you, and this is a no-no. So make sure that you keep this safe and don't share with people that you don't want to have access to your project. Right after our API key, we are going to start some URLs, one for registering new users and one for logging new users. These URLs can be found in Firebase's documentation. Again, links for it in the description of the video. And they are called endpoints. And pay attention here to the end where we are setting our key to be equal to our API key. Finally, we're going to create a variable that is going to store a current token. This token tells us that the user has been logged in. And we are later in the next video use it to make requests on behalf of the user that is currently logged in. To get this token, we're going to use a function called getTokenID. We're going to pass to it a result, which is going to be the response that we got from Firebase, parse it into a dictionary as we get it as an array, and from there we are going to get our ID token. The number 3 on our result here is because the body that is being returned to us as an array has other informations in the first 3 positions of it, and the actual body where the information is the 4th element in this array. If you want to dive deeper into it, you can log these results and see for yourself. For now, let's just keep the 3 over there. We begin by creating the register function. As I said, we're going to take the email and the password, and we can see that we're also taking a 3rd parameter, which is the HTTP request, and we're soon going to see what this is going to do. First, we're going to create the body of our request. This is going to be what we are going to send to the server. In this case, the email and the password of our user. And once again, I know that this is the correct structure because I looked it up on the documentation for Firebase. And then using our HTTP request, we're going to make a request. Now, this is the part that I said that we're going to reach out to the Firebase server and wait for a response. There's a lot going on here, so let's break it into parts. The first parameter is the URL. In this case, it's going to be our register URL. The second one are headers. We're not going to use them in this video, so I'm going to explain them in a next video. The third one is if you want to force SSL. In this case, I left it at the default of false, but you can use it as true as well if you want to. We then have a method, and this is a convention that came from the REST API that I said before. If we reach out to our HTTP client and try to see all the methods that we have, you can see that we have several different methods. Throughout this video, we're going to use only the post one. but in later videos we are going to use different methods. The method is a way for us to tell the server what we want to do with this information. For instance, if you were to use get, this means that we're trying to get some information. If you were to use patch, we're trying to update something in the server. The same with put. And in this case, we're using post because we're posting an information, we're sending an information to the server, and he should do something with that. There are other methods, but we're not going to use them. So there's really no need to go into detail to what they do. And finally, we are converting our dictionary to a JSON because that's what the server expects. Now, the request is something synchronous. This means that we don't know when this request is going to get finished because of the speed of our connection. Maybe the server is not working correctly, so it can take a while for it to respond to us. This means that we're going to have to use yield to stop the execution of our register function. And when the request completed signal gets emitted from our HTTP request node, we're going to get a result, which is going to be an array. And finally, we're going to check if the response code has been 200. This means that everything went okay with our request. If it wasn't 200, this means that we have an error. There are several types of errors. You probably are familiar with error 404, which means that something has not been found. 200 just means okay. And if that's the case, we're going to set our current token to be equal to the result that we get from get token ID from result. Now let's hook this up with our register scene. To do so, let's first go to our register scene, which can be found in interface and register. We already have an attached script to it, and the main structure that we have here are horizontal box containers that have a label and a line edit. We're going to use this line edit later to get input from our user, and when we click on the register button, we are going to reach out to our Firebase script and try to register this user. Before we continue, we have to first add another node to our scene. So with the register selected, we're going to add a new child to it, which is going to be of type HTTP request. And here on the node tab, we can connect the request completed signal to our register. This is going to be emitted whenever the request that we send, for instance, the register request to Firebase has been completed. This signal is going to be emitted and we're going to react accordingly. In the case of our Firebase script, if you remember correctly, we wait for it to then correctly assign our user token. And here we are also going to need the signal from our register button, which is going to be the pressed one. Now at the top of our script, we're going to first get a reference to our HTTP node. We're then going to get references to our line edits for our username and the password, and also the password confirm. And finally, we're going to get a reference to our notification, which is a label that we're going to use to communicate to our player if he has registered correctly or if he has anything wrong inside of his form. When the user clicks on register, we are going to check if either his password or the username are empty, and also check if the password is equal to the confirmed password. If something is wrong, we're going to notify our player about that by setting our notification text to invalid password or username, and we're going to return from the function. Now, if everything is correct with our form, we're just going to call the register function inside of our Firebase script and pass into it our username and our password, and finally our HTTP node. Now, whenever our request has been completed, we are first going to convert our body, which in this case, if we go a little bit to the right here, is a pool byte array, to a dictionary. To do so, we are going to use the JSON parse function and call getString from ASCII from our body. This is going to convert our pool byte array into a string, and then we're going to convert it into a dictionary that is going to be stored in our response body variable. Now, if you remember from our Firebase script, we checked if our response code was 200. In this case, we're going to do almost the same thing, but if it is not 200, this means that we have an error. And if we do have an error, Firebase is going to return to us an error message that we're going to set as the text of our notification. This way, the player can know what he has wrong in his form, and he can try again if he wants to. Finally, if everything is correct and we have successfully registered a new player, we're going to let him know about it, wait for 2 seconds, and then load the login scene. And with this, we can already run our game and see if the registration is working correctly. So let's press F5, click on register. The username is going to be Guilherme, password, confirm password, and we can click on register. It's going to wait for a few seconds, and then registration is going to be successful, and we're taken to the login screen. Also notice if for some reason I decided to type something wrong here, we're going to get this validation, invalid username or password. I'm going to add a password here, which is equal, click on register, and now we're going to get an invalid email error that is coming from the Firebase service. And the same would happen if we, for instance, try to register a user that has already been registered in our system. Now let's implement the login functionality. Now before we continue, I just want to show you what this response body looks like. So once we convert it into a JSON, I'm going to print the result, save and run our game once again, register another user. Once that's done, we can go back to Godot, and here we're going to get all of the information that we have from our response body. So you can see here that we have the ID token that we used before on our Firebase script, the email that we used to register this user, when this token is going to expire, and all other types of information. And lastly, before we continue, I just want to explain something else to you, which is the fact that back on our Firebase script, let me go back to it here, we are using the JSON parse and we're getting an array here, and we're getting the third member of that array. That is because, once again, I'll go back to the register script. What we are getting there is all of these parameters from this function as an array. So the first member is going to be our result, which is if we had any errors trying to reach out to the server, the response code, which is the code that the server is getting back to us, our headers, which we are not using as of now, and our body. So that's the reason why we have that 3. It's not something arbitrary, it's because of this reason right here. So with that, we can now implement the functionality of our login. To do so, let's go back to our Firebase script. And the signature of our login function is going to be pretty much the same as our register, though the request is now going to be to our login URL instead for our register URL. And finally, we're going to yield for the result of our request and then set our current token to the correct one. As you can see, both functions are pretty much the same. If you want a quick assignment, you can try to convert both of them into only one, and maybe use a flag to determine if you should use the register or the login URL. Decide to keep them as separate functions just for convenience and to be easier to explain what is happening. Now our login function is working, so we can go to our login scene. And here our structure is pretty much the same as our register scene, but we only have 2 inputs, our username and our password. Once again, we're going to need an HTTP request node here, so we can add it to our tree. Let's connect our login button pressed signal to our login script, and also the request completed from our HTTP request to our login script. Once again, we're going to begin by getting a reference to our HTTP request node, then to our inputs, which are our username and password, and finally to our notification label. When we try to log in, we are going to verify if our username or password are empty, and in the case of either of them being empty, we're going to notify our player and return from the function. If everything is okay, we're then going to call the login function on our Firebase script, passing to it our username and password and the HTTP request node. Once our request has been completed, we are going to once again convert our body into a dictionary, check if our result code is different than 200, and then get the error message that Firebase is returning to us and set it to the text field of our notification label. And finally, if everything went correctly, we're going to notify our player and let him know that he has been successfully signed in. And with this, we can also test our game once again. This time I'm going to click on login, enter my username and my password, and click on login. Now, as you can see, we are greeted with a signing successful message, and in the case of a real game, we would then let our player start playing. Congratulations, you just integrated Godot and Firebase using the HTTP request node. Now, even though here we use the HTTP request node, which is a node that allows us to make requests and signals when they are completed, we could have also used the HTTP client, which is a more low-level interface. So I decided to use the HTTP request because we don't really need the HTTP client, but if you wanted to, you could have also used that. There are some things that can be improved in this demo, and I'm going to leave them as assignments for you. So if you're looking for some challenge, feel free to do them. The first one is the fact that once we try to make a request, for instance, trying to log in with an account, we can keep clicking on login. And if we go back to Godot and open our debugger, you can see that we get some errors because we're trying to make an HTTP request when there is already one in progress. So you could, for instance, disable our button and enable it only when our request was completed. You could also, for instance, when we are signing in, take the player to another screen and let him sign out. All we had to do is take him back to the login screen and remove our token from the Firebase script. Just as a recap, in this video we learned about the HTTP request node, how to use REST APIs, and also how we could use Firebase and its auth system to authenticate users and also register them. As I said before, there are going to be some links in the description of the video, so if you want to dive deeper, please go ahead and look at those links. Once again, I'm sorry about my voice. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.